course, the big discussion as of yesterday in Battle Creek is about our municipal water system, and there's some concerns that turned up in recent testing. City Manager Rebecca Fleury joins us in our studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Tim.
Also, we have Eric Pessell, who is Calhoun County Board of Health Officer. Eric, good morning.
Morning, Tim.
Nice to have you here, too. Have either of you really ever thought about manganese before yesterday?
I haven't.
Probably not since chemistry class.
I mean, basically, this is just a natural occurring element, sort of like iron, I guess, in a way.
Yes, that is correct.
Anybody who has a water softener knows about, iron in the water. And so this is just another thing, and not routinely tested for. Is that correct?
Correct. Manganese is an unregulated element as far as drinking water systems. But, as you know, over the past probably 4 years, the EPA has, issued some bulletins to say we might start testing for unregulated elements just to see how they are occurring in public water systems. And this was one of those cases where the city of Springfield was being proactive about unregulated elements, and they're part of the Battle Creek water system, and that's when we learned of an elevated level of manganese.
Now, there were 3 areas tested, 2 fire hydrants and the Verona well field. Did I get that right?
You do, but there were different times. So the first elevated came from an initial testing at a fire hydrant in Springfield. Mm-hmm. Then we send those into the lab, and when the results came back as elevated, then we were contacted by the DEQ to say we'd like you to test additional sites. That hydrant again, a hydrant on the Battle Creek side of the water system, and then test at the Verona plant, which is the large water treatment plant. And let me note that we've been filtering for manganese at the water treatment plant since the mid to late 90s. So, we are doing that at the plant. But I don't think anybody ever thought about, what happens if we take a test at the fire hydrant level? And to kind of, I guess, add layers to our puzzle here is we were also hydrant flushing. Both the city of Springfield and the city of Battle Creek were in the fire hydrant flushing season. That usually happens from Memorial Day to about the 4th of July. And we don't know if that if that kind of aggravates and stirs up things in the water distribution system. These are unknowns and kind of new territory for us. So we are following the guidelines and the recommendations of both the DEQ and the EPA about what do we do next now that we have this information.
How much time elapsed between the initial finding of the first hydrant and then the subsequent testing done by DEQ?
That's a really good question. I would probably say 10 days maybe.
Mm-hmm. And the testing at the Verona well field was negative, correct?
Zero parts per million.
And by negative, it's like X-rays. It's positive.
That's the good.
It's a good thing.
Good test to be negative. Correct?
Yes, right. And for anybody who doesn't know, that's where our water comes from, right? The Verona well field.
Correct.
And has for a long, long time. Ever since we used to get it out of Gogwak Lake, it's been the Verona well field. So that part of it is good too. So. Obviously, then, a lot more testing needs to be done, and probably everybody in Battle Creek, Bedford Township, Penfield Township, Emmett Township is wondering what's coming out of my tap.
You're right. So our next step is to get the next recommended testing sites from the DEQ. Remember, they're in control of where we test next, and so I believe what I saw is I think that came in very late last night. I'm going to a meeting right after this. I believe the testing will occur today, and we will get those to an expedited lab as soon as possible. And once we have those results back, we'll know what the next steps are. I think the list is about 50 additional sites, which include personal taps, other locations in the water system, because now what we want to know is where is it in the system, and at what levels, if it is existing beyond kind of the fire hydrant area.
Mm-hmm. Eric Pessell, I heard you say at the press conference, too, you addressed the first thing was everybody I ran into, and I started to tell them about this. Oh, so we got to boil our water. And the first thing you said was, no.
No, when you boil water, you actually reduce the volume of water, which increases the concentration of manganese.
Yeah, because boiling doesn't do anything to the manganese or the iron.
You have the same concentration, but less volume of water.
Right.
So
boiled water only pertains to what? Things that are alive.
Yeah, bacterial. So we don't want to give a confusing message. we have a city here in Calhoun County that's maybe off of their boil water advisory today, but they're on a boil water advisory because they had a broken water line and they lost pressure, so the DEQ requires them to do that. And that's a good thing. You want to do that in case there was bacteriological contamination. So in this case, what we heard was that some moms will make their own food for their babies when they get to be 8, 9, 10 months old. And part of that process over the years of hand-me-downs from generation to generation is they boil the water. And so we just want to make sure that they were clear, don't boil the water if you're going to make your...
Yeah, they'll just concentrate it even more. What is the issue? I mean, this is just for infants. Do we just believe that it's going to have a more detrimental effect on infants, and for what reason?
Well, that's interesting, and I've learned more about manganese in the last 2 days than I probably knew in my 51 years, as well as probably Rebecca. But the adults have the ability, and older children, our body has we need manganese. Mm-hmm. It's a nutrient, and it's a useful nutrient. In fact, it's a nutrient found in the formula of baby food at a very small dose. Adults have the ability to extract or get rid of the excess manganese the body doesn't need. Unfortunately, 0 to 12-month-olds have been found, the toxicologists tell me, they can't get rid of it as fast, and so it stays in their body longer. And so that's the problem, why it affects infants different than older children or adults.
And do we even have any idea what those effects are? Have there been studies? Or?
Well, the toxicologists the state toxicologists, and they're speaking to national toxicologists across the country. They do know that there's some potential if you have high levels in an infant, where there could be some developmental issues if they were to continue to receive those high doses.
Similar to lead?
Yeah, similar.
Because we're more familiar with that.
Correct.
We've been dealing with that for a long time, and so we kind of know what the effects can be.
Right.
Lead paint chips, of course, being a really big threat for
a big issue that we know more about. But manganese would be acting the same way at very high doses over a long period of time. There is an acute exposure, which we put in the press release, I think, of 1 to 10 days of high levels. And that's why we wanted to get the word out as quickly as possible to use that bottled water for making infant formula.
Have those levels, and when we say levels, the federal government, and they've set a certain threshold where if it tests above this, then we got a problem. Have they changed recently in recent years?
No, and like Rebecca said, this is an unregulated metal, so nutrient. So they haven't changed. I think, in my opinion, the EPA required this sampling across the country because I think there may be some concerns that they're learning as they continue to develop the data and toxicologists look at this issue. They're concerned, so that's why they're having everybody sample for this, test for this across the country. I think this case in Battle Creek will help lead them into making some decisions, and maybe they'll lower it or come up with some other requirements. I guess we're at a wait and see on that.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, we have no reason to believe we're in terrible danger, imminent dire straits.
This is an abundance of caution.
And right, and as a result, I guess, of the problems that we've seen in Flint.
Exactly right. Again, the health and safety of our community is the number one priority. So I like the word abundance of caution because that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, and there are a lot of critics that say, yeah, we could have used some of that abundance up in Flint a couple of years back, and so let's learn from it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, very good then. I know that, this stuff is really nothing new, too. This neighborhood where we're sitting right now battles an arsenic problem. And the federal guidelines for arsenic have been raised a lot. It's a much more sensitive issue now. And we have a lot of people in these neighborhoods around here right now that have elaborate filtration systems. And they've had to get off of wells entirely and get on city water, which, does pass the arsenic threshold. Am I right? Yeah.
Yep, you are correct. And I think you raise a good point, Tim, is that, Flint really kind of put the spotlight on public drinking water systems and how they're being managed, maintained, what we're testing for. And so I think that is why the EPA, I would say, stepped up their game with asking municipalities across the country to test for these unregulated elements just to see. Because, again, before we had public water systems, all of these were naturally occurring elements and metals in the groundwater. So it is new territory for us, and usually the public water systems is the answer when we have natural occurring things in higher levels like arsenic. But we're learning that things like fire hydrant flushing may affect the levels and quantities in the public drinking system. So this is the time where we need to say, okay, do we need to rethink what we do when we flush fire hydrants, and are we going to see different testings for additional unregulated metals and elements? That's what we're being very proactive, and if we can be of help to other communities, that's what we want to do.
And what options could there be besides flushing these things? Like how frequently we do it, or whether we rotate, or whether we don't do it? I mean,
yes, or whether we test before we flush and after flush, or do we have to issue advisories, different types of advisories during the flushing time? There's a lot of possibilities that we will be discussing with, the EPA and the DEQ as our test results come back, as we test throughout the drinking system.
City Manager Rebecca Fleury is our guest, along with Calhoun County Public Health Department Officer Eric Pessell. Finally got that right. What do we have to go on as far as other communities? Have there been any in Michigan, or have there been some in other areas of the country that have dealt with manganese levels exceeding the threshold?
As far as I know, Tim, we are the first in Michigan. However, we do have some data from Minnesota that I think Eric can talk about, that we're using as kind of a guide as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when the EPA put this sampling protocol in place, they give the municipalities 3 years to sample. So there's several municipalities in the state of Michigan that haven't done this yet. In fact, it was Springfield that actually initiated their sampling, which now Battle Creek is, I guess, complied because now they've sampled. So, but we utilize Minnesota. Minnesota was kind of on top of this because they have it naturally occurring in their geological formation. So it's normal for them to have high levels of manganese in their water wells, whether it be a public water well or a private water well. So we've been using a lot of their very good public health information to really shape our recommendations here.
What are we doing right now in terms of testing homes? What's the plan?
Well, right now, the DEQ is in control of our next testing locations. So I believe that came late last night. So I'm going to a meeting right after this, Tim, to figure out, can we get all of the testing we're required to do? And I believe it's 50 additional sites that will include both residences and then other locations in the water system in the city of Battle Creek. And we've been assured that those results will be expedited to a lab. And as soon as we get those results back, we'll know what our next steps are. Our hope is that they're zero. Right. And that we can lift this drinking water advisory. If there is any elevated levels, then we will work with the DEQ and the EPA to know what our next steps are, and we will keep the public informed along the way.
Any plan to test private wells just to get a comparison?
At this point in time, I know the DEQ is reviewing everything, and that may be something that we hear about coming forward. It's a question that is on the table, at least from our curious point of view. I don't think we have the same geological issues that Minnesota has, but I don't know. And I think that the best thing we could do is do some sampling prior to the house filtration system and just see where the levels are at.
So the plan right now, we do the sampling, we see where we're really at, and as far as tap water coming out in the people's kitchens. And meantime, we err on the side of caution and advise that all infants a year or younger drink strictly bottled water.
Correct. And that's why we have set up several distribution centers throughout the city that began distributing water yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock. I visited most of those sites, and they were very active and busy, especially after 5 o'clock. So please know all of the sites are open today. That's at all the fire stations, stations 1 through 6, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're open 7 days a week, as well as the police department, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. You can also get water at City Hall today from 8 to 5. They're just a Monday through Friday location. And also at the city's DPW on Kendall from 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. I am also learning that I think Vosis will also be a distribution point, as well as the Burma Center. I also want people to know that we have translated the public health notices in both Spanish and in Burmese. There are also videos available for the Burmese population, because there's a lot of dialects in Burmese. It's hard to translate to all the dialects. And we will be working later today to put kind of the information from the press conference in a sign interpreter video, and we'll have that available as well. Oh,
okay, great. Well, appreciate all the info. We'll look for updates, and we'll have you back next week, too, and we'll get an update along about Wednesday. We might maybe start to see some testing results that early, but probably sometime in about a week, would you say?
Yes, but like I said, the DEQ has been great in helping us expedite things. So if that truly was the final list from them that I saw late last night, I imagine that our crews are out testing right now, and we'll get that update out to the public as soon as I know kind of what the time frame is for completing the testing, and then what the estimate is to get the results back.
All right. City Manager Rebecca Fleury, Calhoun County Health Department Officer Eric Pessell, thanks for joining us today in studio.